Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask what moves us, or more accurately, what's going to move us in future.
We look at debates, themes, and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future. Hi, Liam. How are you?
I'm excited. Why am I excited, Johannah?
You're excited because today we're launching our new series of What Moves Us podcast. And what's our new series about?
How to be a startup in rail.
And why is this a good time for us to be starting a new series of podcasting around how to be a startup in rail?
Well, should clarify a new series of episodes. We're sticking to the main channel. You don't have to find us anywhere else. Why is it an interesting time? I'm not sure. Why? Do tell me why it's an interesting time. It's a very difficult time for startups at the moment.
A difficult time for startups, which I'm sure we're going to reflect on a lot more on during this series and also on today's podcast, but also because of this, regardless of sort of like pauses, etc. It's an exciting time to be part of rail because last week we had the launch of the government's consultation paper, A Railway Fit for Britain's Future.
Yes, and we can discuss whether it's fit or the opposite of fit, unfit. Yeah, it is. I guess, yes, it's optimistic. Fine, I'll be optimistic. Just been burnt for the last few years.
Do you know, it is really difficult to be optimistic, isn't it? Because I guess, you know, I'm reflecting back to where we were 4 years ago. Well, yeah, 4 years ago. So it was about May 2021, wasn't it? When the William Shapps review came out, and we were very optimistic about that because there was a lot of good stuff in what was being proposed, but none of it's been delivered. We haven't even had much reorganizing of deck chairs.
No, but thinking back to that, I do remember there being a lot about innovation and bringing new ideas and commercial models. I would defer to you to explain what the new consultation says, but that was the good part about that paper. I have not. It remains to be difficult in commercial models. In fact, I was at the what was it called? The Rail Innovation Exhibition a couple of weeks back, which is run by the Department for Transport and Innovate UK. And it's effectively who got funding last year through the first of a kind, shows off their project or product at this innovation exhibition. And the conversation I was having with everyone was still, this is nice, but where's the where is the ability for anyone to buy these solutions? And who is in?
And I know that's not what we're going to talk about today, but I think it's something we should certainly revisit as part of this series because we both have our own startups and have been involved in other startups and that is a gap in the Innovate UK process, is that despite support, it is really difficult to then get onward development or to have a marketplace of how you buy new innovation and how you take that next step. So I think it's certainly something we want to visit in new series. And I think as we have our discussion today about the consultation, I think what becomes clear is that there's also a gap in this consultation about how you break into this space, how we innovate, how we make the most of opportunities, so that's really what we want to do as part of this series, but also in the terms of this consultation, how we can give startups and businesses some real world advice on how to respond to the consultation as well.
Maybe we should come with the answer with the what's the word at the end of this series. Maybe we should re-ask the question of, would you want to be a startup in rail?
But I think do we think rail is any harder than any other industry? Because being a startup is tough, and I think maybe we can share some of those experiences about how difficult it is to be a startup. Maybe we can bring understanding. Maybe we can help startups, but also bring understanding to industry as well about just how tough it is to be a startup and some of the sacrifices you make. Because I think being a startup looks quite glamorous, or you might have the view that startups become multimillionaires or unicorns or whatever, and the reality is just completely different, and I think that's what's quite interesting about the consultation, is that whilst I realise the consultation is about the structure, the organisation, that, you know, there's nothing in there about sort of like procurement. There's nothing there about innovation. I mean, for all the talk, from people like Peter Kyle and that about AI and emerging technologies and that, not much in there about that either.
Lots to discuss. How are we proceeding from this moment?
So last week, the government, the Department for Transport issued their consultation on the formation of Great British Railways.
Yeah, so Great British Railways, for anyone who is new to it, is the idea of effectively bringing the railway operations back into the public sector, but also bringing the infrastructure into one organisation called Great British Railways. So that's all the current disparate train operators that used to be called franchise operators, all bought into the public sector, run by a new organisation called Great British Railways, which is going to be based in Derby.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read a direct quote from the introduction by Heidi Alexander, the Secretary of State for Transport. We will establish Great British Railways, a single directing mind, bringing together responsibility for the rail network itself and for the publicly owned passenger services that run it. This will be a new organisation with a customer-focused culture responsible for the day-to-day operation of the network and directly accountable for improving its performance. We will end days of inefficiency and competing interest, consolidating functions currently spread across Network Rail, the Department for Transport, and 14 separate rail operators into a single organisation with a single cohesive strategy. So that's essentially what this is about. And then following on from that, there's a series of areas that they want to bring under this directing mind. And I think the directing mind is quite important because that is a difference to the William Shapps review, which talked about a guiding mind. So I think there's definitely something in here about intention, about it being more about being controlling and directing, and this it's going to be separate from the Department for Transport. Some of those functions are going to leave the department function, whereas I think under the William Shapps review that it was still going to very much be guided by the DFT.
So as a consumer of rail, a rail passenger, does this set out that in 10 years' time, if there is a failure on one of the rail lines, it's Great British Railways' fault, people will hold them to account, or will people still call on the Department for Transport Minister to fix it?
That's an interesting, and it's not clear. I would say not clear at all, because it's whether you think that whoever ends up as being the head of GBR will see the re-establishment of the Fat Controller. So to some of the previous British Rail greats, like Bob Reid and etc. Whether you'll see the re-establishment of that, and there will be, and the government Secretary of State will be at arm's length. But I would say that probably what will be easier is that it will just be one organisation, regardless of whether the buck still stops at Secretary of State. It will be, you will not be saying, well, it's LNER's fault or it's Thameslink fault or whatever. It will all be under the banner of GBR. But although later on in the document they talk about tracks will be owned by run by GBR, the trains will be operated by GBR, the trains will be run by GBR, it's not clear whether rolling stock, comes into, so whether it will still be private operators leased into GBR. That's not clear under this structure.
I understood that the rolling stock slash the trains that were currently owned by third-party organizations continued to be owned by those third-party organizations. I would imagine in a future situation, Great British Railways would just buy its own trains. However, given everything we've just said, simplification, getting rid of competing interests, etc., Great British Railways will only actually run 75% of the trains. So it's not starting off as a clean slate of overall control, because all the trains in Scotland will continue to be run by Transport Scotland, and all the trains in Wales will continue to be run by Transport for Wales. And indeed, regional authorities have been told through devolution that they will get to control local train services. And Transport for London runs its own trains.
Yes, and also in that area at the end of the document, which talks about devolution and consultation with Transport Scotland, Transport for Wales, mayoral authorities, Transport for London, there is also a small sentence about open access operators, although it's not called open access operators, but there will still be space for operators that do not come under the GBR banner. I think that's sort of the wording that is used.
Yes. So just for interest, I attended the meeting yesterday of the all-party parliamentary group for rail in Parliament yesterday, and the theme of that discussion was particularly about access to the network, as suggested by this document, is as an open access operator or as a freight company gaining access to the network and applying to use paths. The challenge that this document would set out in terms of who gets to decide whether you can run your service. So at the moment, it is decided effectively by, well, you have recourse to an independent regulator, and in a future situation, you may not have recourse to an independent regulator. So you're effectively asking Great British Railways to allow non-GBR trains onto its tracks.
Yes, because that's probably one of the big changes that is being proposed, in that at the moment operators bid for their paths, Network Rail demonstrate that those paths will work, and it's the ORR that decides who gets the paths at timetable conferences, which is a long strategic planning process. And what this document is trying to do is bring in something that is more agile and more responsive to passenger demand, so that you could really, this has been looked at in the past, and I don't know whether this is the kind of detail that they're looking at, is that what you could introduce, and this might be something that somebody might want to think about in terms of their response to the consultation, is that you could maybe introduce something that was a bit more akin to the Swiss Railway, which was clock-face timetabling. You have a 7-day-a-week railway, and then you overlay your seasonality and your peaks and events and stuff over the top of it, and that's done on a or even the Japanese railway, and that's done on a daily weekly basis, and that, so actually you have a core timetable and then you have a timetable over the top of it. But as you pointed out, it's not clear at the moment, because also there is a new regulator being proposed under this, is where if you didn't agree with the decision to the timetable, who you'd appeal to, because I think also what seems to become apparent within the consultation as well, if I'm reading it rightly, is that the only people that would actually pay for access is open access operators
And freight operators.
and freight. Yes.
Yes.
Where currently everybody pays for access, and there's different values because I think that's been one of the issues has been or tensions between franchised operators and open access operators, is that franchise operators pay the full cost of accessing the network, whereas open access only pay certain access charges. They don't pay the full complete charges.
Right.
So that will be interesting in terms of what that means for Treasury and what that means for cost, because as we know at the moment, cost of the railway sits with DFT, and that's why we have a situation within the train operators at the moment where it's very difficult to make the case for spending money to grow revenue. So we've got a case where they're always trying to reduce costs in order to improve their fees because the Treasury takes the revenue. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that as well.
Right.
So that's kind of an overview of what's in it. But as we started off, we said, sort of like there's a and I think this is maybe we didn't reflect on this with William Shapp so much, was because we thought there was a lot of good stuff in there, and we thought there was a lot of hope and that. But obviously, different government, different policies. We've had from a strategic point of view. This is a government that wants growth. This is a government that wants to invest in technology. This is a government that wants to invest in AI, but not much that can be drawn on within this document that points to wider government policy. Do you think that's important?
Well, I do. I was actually, when you were just before you said that, just before you said that line, I was bringing it back to why this is important for startups and people in the rail innovation group community is that the structure and the incentives that are being decided now will influence what the railway does in future. For example, with technology, is if they're trying to drive passengers, that's one policy outcome. If they're trying to improve customer experience, that's another policy outcome. And it's those outcomes and incentives that decide what type of products you'd then buy further down the line. So if you are trying to improve revenue, if you are trying to get people to buy more fares, then you would make it easier to buy fares. Therefore, you'd buy a tech product to enable you to buy with whatever the next generation of phones is. And it's just that at the moment, it's not. I think there's a anxiety that the law that's going to be put in place to start up Great British Railways may or may not include those things that in 5 years' time would be the deciding factor as to which tech to buy or whether you should be improving the digital journey of passengers, or whether you want to make better use of the network timetable. Therefore, you might buy a AI product that reorganizes train paths and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you would say that, because if we were to take the ticketing and fares one, I don't get the sense that what they've put in there is going to be an enabler or allow for sort of like some strategic direction to be taken that would allow something that would change fundamentally, because it almost seems like like the comment that I remember reading is that they're going to, whatever RDG do today is going to just be a cut and paste across to GBR. So where's the enabling innovation within that? Because I think one of the things that if you were to compare it, say, to Transport for London, and I know national fares are a lot more complicated, is that the mayor sets the fares and Transport for London has a few ticket offices still and ticket machines, but and and you can touch and go and can you still use an Oyster card? Are Oyster cards still a thing? Yeah. But TfL also allow, because of their open access to data and things, anybody can start an app and do their own thing with it, can't they?
Yes.
And that seems to be a gap within this consultation, do you think?
I do.
Sort of like allowing sort of like that, enabling that sandbox area within some of these,
But that would come from, as I say, that would come from the incentives and structure you put in at the start. I don't think we need to answer those questions about the sandbox or the I don't know, access to data at the start. I think it's you put the policy outcomes at the start, and then those are the enablers to whether you choose to do these things in future.
So are the right incentives and policy areas in this document to enable that then?
I don't think so, from what I've read. No, they were in the review from 4 years ago, and I'm not saying that they're not being included in the new legislation. I'm just saying that in that consultation document about oversight, it doesn't seem to settle people's anxieties.
So what else needs to go in here to settle those anxieties then?
Well, I think you probably throw a bone to some of them, and I mean, if you just put a bullet point list at the end saying these are the things we're still considering and will have a look at future stages, or indeed, we do think it's important to keep some sort of commercial mind. It might be, I don't know, it might be that if you continue to allow open access operators in some form and they're dynamic and future adapt to technology and bring in better passenger experience, then that might be how you drive through change. Because they'll be incentivized to do that to get more passengers and get more revenue.
So we've been reflecting on sort of like the last few years and sort of like difference between the original proposal by William Shapps and sort of like this consultation but we've still had a lot of our members still innovating within rail. So I want to. So if we were sort of like wanting to encourage our members to respond to this consultation, that what would we be saying? You know, this is good stuff that is happening despite sort of like these structural issues and the challenges with the consultation.
I think in terms of that, it comes down to whether, I mean, again, this comes down to anxiety because we don't have any certainty of it. But I suspect if you bring in a national organization that runs 75% of the trains, it's going to be very, very difficult for a small company to supply to that ginormous organization. One of the advantages of having a fragmented railway is that there are lots of different procurement channels. If there is one ginormous one in Derby, a huge building full of people putting procurement rules in place, the startups may as well just not bother because it will be too difficult to do anything. And that's not a fault of an organization that big. It's just that that's what happens when you have an organization that big. They have to have lots and lots of bureaucracy to manage it and ensure fairness. But the only people who can manage to supply to those are large companies who, with resources to understand the procurement landscape in future. So I would say that to maintain the benefits of the startups and digital companies that are currently in the ecosystem, you have to at least acknowledge that procurement needs to be curated to the size of the spend. There should be a much clearer and simpler procurement channel if you want to buy, I don't know, a new app for a local area versus a national rail fully integrated full country ticketing solution.
So I think there's something that we should park for a future podcast there, which is about procurement risk and making sure that we manage risk better when we're buying stuff, because I think that is a really good point to make. Because I think you get that all the time within rail, where somebody is purchasing, a 20k consultancy service, but they still want you to have the same level of indemnities as if they were, buying a big infrastructure project costing £10 million.
Yes.
Which is clearly, inefficient and overkill. But I think also, just going back to your point about this centralized system based in Derby, because is it clear that it's still going to be Derby GBR this new railway.
Well, I mean, that's where the HQ of the new railway will
So,
be.
but I think along with the minimal mention of innovation and no mention of startup culture, and that's in the documentation, is that I don't know too much about this, but there's been this setup of GBRX, which is intended to be the innovation arm of GBR. But where was that in the document, and should it have been in the document in order to say that, you know, we are going to be driving innovation and this is what this part of the organization is going to be doing? Because clearly there was some big objectives in there about reliability, delivering to the passenger, and that, but that isn't necessarily going to come out of business as usual.
Well, again, this goes back to incentives. It should come out of business as usual. It should come out of, I need to run an efficient railway at low cost. Here is the newest technology to allow me to do that.
So do you think there should be a
Maintain
GBRX then?
continually that the public sector should not be air quotes. The public sector should not be procuring innovation in air quotes. They should be procuring products that happen to use the latest technology to deliver their business goals. It should be making their business more efficient. You can't just have an innovation department for the sake of having an innovation department to continually whiz up new things that don't have a role in the business.
Good. Yes, absolutely right. So do you think then that it's more important that there are organizations like Rail Innovation Group who foster grassroots startups and put the people who are buying in contact with the people who've had the products that meet their challenges, rather than, as you say, you have businesses who work on innovation?
Yes, I do. I mean, I sort of in my mind have a thought that, as you mentioned GBRX, that if you're a, I don't know, in the engineering department of Great British Railways, and uh, you want to procure a different way of delivering maintenance for bridges or something, and you're obviously wrapped up in your day to day, you don't have a chance to test those new things. You then assume that the offline GBRX was the person who then tested and make sure that your product was up to code, and maybe there was a bit of public sector funding to help stimulate some new development. And that was all done in sort of what do I want to say, like a safe space sandbox type thing, that before you brought it onto the mainline railway. But all of those things should still come from the mainline railway with a problem statement or a challenge or a need. But
Yeah,
then,
and I
because you
think I
started that way, you then have the procurement route for someone's actually wanting to buy it.
yeah. So yeah, yeah, I get that. Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously Network Rail, well, not obviously, Network Rail do have challenge statements. But I don't think it's clear how sort of like that will be managed in the future. Does it need managing it? You know, because how do you, 'cause I think that's part of the problems with being a startup, isn't it? Is how do you find the person you need to speak to? How do you find, you know, the challenge that they're trying to solve, and that because the organization is so big. So is that a gap that GBRX is meant to fill, that innovation does happen within the business as usual, but GBRX manages it? I don't know.
Well, I
It's
mean, again, this is difficult because we're jumping ahead to themes for this whole series. But if you create a challenge, if in a normal logical business commercial model, you would say, I have a challenge statement. Here's the current amount of money I spend on this problem or the sticking plaster to overcome the problem. If you come to with a solution that solves this thing, here's my budget that I currently spend. I'd like you to supply a product that does it for less money, and then for my business, I save money. I know that can't happen. That is very difficult to happen in a public procurement world where there's 10-year contracts and frameworks and everything else, and that's always going to be the thing it hamstrings just issuing challenge statements. Because there should be a budget line that says, here's what we currently spend, here's our challenge, here's what we'd like, here's if come to us with solutions that cost less.
So I think you're right. You know, we are sort of like creeping onto topics that we might want to talk as part of this series, but I think it's also something that we should consider in part of a response to the consultation as well.
Yes,
You know,
which I
that
am
had this.
aware that you are writing for us.
Thank you for making that pressure on me online, so I now have to do it. But just for our listeners, just in terms of final thoughts, I'm going to obviously read the consultation for yourselves.
Yes.
And then next week, we are going to talk a bit more about our response to the consultation, I guess. But also how
Drafted it
no,
early.
I may have done. Are you going to help me? Are you going to give me your thoughts? And perhaps we can bring Debs in on the conversation as well. Maybe she'd give me some of her thoughts as well.
Yes, I'll fill out the template you send.
So we'll sort out some of the questions that we think will be important to startups, and we'll sort of like talk about how you can influence the consultation, how you can respond and that. But in the meantime, if anyone's got any ideas, please do get in touch and we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Till next time.